After I retired from the Foreign Service and my diplomatic career in 1999, came home to Des Moines to take over leadership of the World Food Prize Foundation, I would still get invited to go out and give talks about diplomacy, some aspect of it for my career. Colleges and universities in particular would like to invite me. And on one particular day, I was invited to go to Grinnell College, that wonderful, small, elite liberal arts institution about halfway between Des Moines and Iowa City. And I spent the morning speaking to classes, and at lunch, a couple of the professors invited me to have lunch with about 10 or 12 of their top students. And we go to the faculty club, and we're having lunch in this nice room with a round table, and questioning's continuing. And at one point, one of the students asked me, well, what's your biggest moment? What's your biggest memory? What do you take away as the overall top experience or memory? And I hadn't been asked that before, and it kind of gave me pause, and I thought for a second about it. And I think the student was expecting me to say, well, it was being with Henry Kissinger in the White House during a crisis, or with Secretary Jim Baker in Paris as the Cambodian agreement is being signed, something like that. And after pausing, I said to the student, hugs. What I remember most of all are the hugs that I got along the way. I think everybody was surprised at that answer. And then I went on to detail them. I said, I remember that hug of a father in Vietnam whose son I had saved his life by rushing him to the hospital, driving through heavy traffic to get him there in time after the boy had been shot in the stomach. I remember the hug of a man, Vietnamese man, who I had driven down a dark road late at night, insecure road, found him badly hurt in an accident with an American truck. We had gotten him airlifted, medevaced to a hospital, saved his life there. He drove up to my team house, asked to see me, and I didn't even, see him, wasn't sure who he was, and he rushes up and throws his arms around me to hug me. I remember Sergeant Davis, that Air Force sergeant who was drowning in a canal in Duc Ton District, when I plunged into the canal and pulled him out. And a week or so later at the U.S. Air Force team house in Sadek, I was there at an event, and he came up and hugged me, said, "Sir, you saved my life." I remember being in Governor Ray's office with a meeting for the first time, a Vietnamese refugee who had desperately written to us. He was languishing in a refugee camp, no hope for the future. And I started making efforts, found a sponsor, got an agency to take him out of these refugee camps and bring him to the United States. And here he was going to be resettled, find a new life, begin a new life here in Iowa. And standing there, we met him, and he just impulsively threw his arms around me to hug me. I have to say it's very, very, very unusual in Asian societies, and in particular in Vietnam, in Cambodia. People aren't going around hugging each other. So every one of these hugs was, unusual and a special memory, intense feeling. I remember the hug with a man named Kan Man in my living room of my residence in Cambodia. He was trembling. He was so fearful that as an opposition activist, political activist, he was going to be now singled out and assassinated or murdered because the country had gone back to violence and civil war. And I held him. I could feel him shake as I held him. And I said, "You'll always have a safe place here with my residents. I will keep you safe." And indeed, he was safe and was able to go on living and working and being an activist in Cambodia. I remember the hugs I got from my wife and my daughter Kelly when we had evacuated all the American citizens in the country and had opened up a hotel ballroom in Phnom Penh where we told Americans, come, stay there. My wife and daughter were there. They were serving food to American citizens. The hotel staff had all left during this crisis. And I remember seeing my wife and daughter safe and the three of us hugging each other, knowing that they were safe, how wonderful they were, this unusual experience for a diplomatic family, for an American Foreign Service family. But serving American citizens was one of the things that we did. We knew was our role to do that. During that crisis, we would set up in the embassy an emergency management team, and we'd be 24 hours a day working at it, and so intense and reacting and doing everything that we could to keep people safe and reporting back to Washington about the situation. And finally, when it broke and order was restored and fighting had stopped, as we were leaving, the defense attaché, the senior U.S. military man, wonderful Army officer named Vic Raphael, said to me, "Sir," and I said, "Yes, Colonel Raphael, what is it?" He said, "Sir, permission to give the ambassador a hug." I never had a request like that from an Army officer. I said something like, "Permission granted," and we gave each other a hug, and he said, "I'd do this again with you anytime." Kind of the highest compliment that somebody in our intelligence services, military services could share. Being in dangerous situations, being in combat would bring you close to the people you were with. I remember as I was leaving Duc Ton district, we had shared several hours with the young South Vietnamese Army officers that we went into battle with every day. And finally, as I'm leaving, we're not going to be together again, the camaraderie all came out, and where we are hugging each other. We're all, in our 20s, junior officers, lieutenants, captains, and me, the district senior advisor. I just remember those hugs among comrades that last a long time. I remember Ted Crosby, a wonderful dear friend who was a distinguished scientist at Monsanto, and we were here at the World Food Prize, and he was so taken with what we were doing, the way we were honoring people that we'd worked so closely together with him, gave me a hug and thanking me for what I was doing and telling me how pleased he was to be able to support me. Ambassador Chuck Larson, a dear, dear friend, a U.S. ambassador to Latvia, as I was walking out of my last ceremony as the president of the World Food Prize, came up, gave me a big hug, said, "I love you, man." And I said, "I love you." And that camaraderie between us, things we had done so much together. There are two particularly poignant memories of hugs. One, not really quite a hug, but when the rockets hit my house in Phnom Penh, blowing in all the windows, knocking them out, almost coming into the bedroom where our three children and my wife and I were, and throwing our children on the floor as the house was ringed in automatic weapons fire, and my wife and I lying on top of them, squeezing them, hugging them, protecting them with our bodies, praying desperately that any bullets that will come in will hit us, will kill us, so we can protect our children. You never know how much you love your children until you're in a situation like that. The final hug, not quite a hug, but I was with Norman Borlaug just a day or so before he would pass away. Norm was kind of sitting up in a chair and lapsing in and out of consciousness, and I was there just kind of holding his hand, and he opened his eyes and looked up at me and saw that it was me, and he said, Ken, I'm so very grateful. Squeezed my hand as he did that, and I squeezed his hand. His voice trailed off. He became comatose again. The last words Norman Borlaug ever spoke to me to convey his gratitude for what we had accomplished, what we had built the World Food Prize into, to fulfill his dream that it could be a Nobel Prize for food and agriculture. It's all those hugs, those connections with people, those intense feelings that are my most outstanding memories from my diplomatic career and my World Food Prize career.